Who would win in a one-on-one fight? Steve from Minecraft or the Terrarian from Terraria? If you want to skip the intro, which I would not recommend since it goes over all the rules of this challenge, but if you do, you can skip to the time on screen and there will be an intro bar at the bottom of the screen. This scenario is using each character's best gear with a full inventory of gear for restocks, but after you run out of that, you can't get any more. In Steve's case, he can have an ender chest full of shulker boxes, but if he runs out of that, no more restocks. While the Terrarian can have things like a piggy bank and chester. We'll go over a few different scenarios and the best strategies for each of them. They also can't just run away since there would be a world border in this scenario. I made content on mostly Terraria, but I do know some about modern Minecraft PvP tactics, so we'll go over the mace, end crystals, and more. This video will cover the newest versions of each game, and for Minecraft, it will be Java Edition. I've seen a lot of videos covering this topic, and the biggest point people make about Minecraft is that the mace can one-hit, but in Terraria, we have the lance, which it can also one-hit. Another point that people neglect to cover is to one-hit the Terrarian with the mace, Steve still has to hit him first, and that would be extremely difficult since the Terrarian has wings in the Rod of Harmony, so he can just teleport around instantly, basically forever. We'll get back to the mace later in the video, but for now we'll go over some points that I've seen some other people use in videos for who would win. The first one I want to talk about is I've seen some people say if it's true potential then Steve would win since he has creative mode, but this is just wrong since the Terrarian has journey mode and journey mode has God mode, making a draw. I've also seen someone mention that the Terrarian isn't technically 2D, that he's in a 2D world. They mentioned that the toys and comics make the Terrarian 3D, so the Terrarian is 3D in a 2D world, which is what we'll be going off of in this scenario. A lot of people also say that Steve is stronger since he can hold more weight in gold bars, but that doesn't really come down to strength because both characters are infinitely strong. That comparison really just came down to the inventory. But in a one-on-one fist fight, Minecraft Steve would win since the Terrarian can't punch. Another big disadvantage for Steve that I've surprisingly seen no one go over is the fact that to heal, Steve has to sit there eating. Meanwhile, the Terrarian literally just has to hit the H button and heals instantly. But the Terrarian does have a 1-minute timer, making this a little bit more fair. Now for part 2 of the video. We'll truly get into the question of who would win. For health bar, the Terrarian has 20 hearts plus 5 health each from life fruit, giving him 500 health, but then using a life force potion gives you an extra 20%, giving him 600 health. The best conversion I could find would be converting each of Steve's hearts to 20 health in Terraria health. So Steve has 8 hearts plus an extra 8 from absorption since Steve's main food would be notch apples. Converting it to Terraria's health is surprisingly easy since we'll say the regular 10 hearts is 20 health, and the absorption since the yellow will count them as 25 health each, giving a total of 400, similar to life fruit. For damage conversion, it's also pretty easy, because 1 damage in Minecraft is half a heart, so 10 damage in Terraria. This means a sharpness 5, strength 2 netherite sword does 170 damage, and a critical hit would do 255 damage, since a crit does 1.5 times damage. This seems like a ton compared to the Terrarian's 600 health, killing him in 3 hits, and since a netherite sword can attack every 0.6 seconds with full strength, he can defeat the Terrarian in 1.8 seconds, but we still need to factor in armor. But before armor is the Terrarian's damage, and for this video we'll be going off of a legendary zenith with solar flare armor and accessories for damage and mobility. We'll go over the armor and accessories later on in the video. But for the Terrarian's damage, I tested this out on a single target dummy and got about 5,000 to 6,000 damage per second without armor or accessories. I even got a custom target dummy with 360 health, and by timing it down to the exact frame at 60 frames per second using my editing software, I defeated it in 14 frames at 60 FPS. That means Steve would die pretty much instantly. Right? Wrong, because both games have something called iframes, which makes it so you can't get comboed. In Minecraft, the way iframes work is you can get hit once per half second, every 10 ticks, and they're 20 ticks per second by default. So, you can get hit once per half second. Easy, right? Well, it's a little more complicated than that. If you get hit twice in a half second, one does say 3 damage and the other does 5, you take the 5 damage. You always take the higher. After cutting down some footage to exactly 1 second of attacking with the Zenith in Terraria, I counted 14 projectiles that can hit a target in a second. And from the Zenith, only 2 of these can actually hit Steve in a second. So now to find the average damage. I went over 5 seconds of footage frame by frame and counted the amount of critical hits, and on average, I got 3 critical hits in a second, which were all about 400 damage. So on average, you would deal about 800 damage per second to Steve. For Terraria's iframes, we won't count them since they last less than 0.6 seconds, which is the fastest attack that Steve can do while doing full damage. And since Steve has 400 health, on average he would die in half a second, while at best he would take down the Terrarian in 1.8 seconds with a sword. We won't go over axes in this video since it's only better than the sword because of armor toughness and shields, neither of which are in Terraria. And now it's time for the most complicated part, the armor. But not Terraria's, since Terraria's armor is super straightforward, while Minecraft's armor is simple except for armor toughness. Armor toughness makes it so if you take more damage you get less protection, and it's pretty annoying to calculate, and since I need a video this week, I'm just going to round it to 80% damage reduction despite the high amount of Terraria's damage. And this means from the 800 damage per second, Steve would reduce a massive 640 damage from it, making him take only 160 damage per second. But now, for the Terraria's defense. Steve will of course have Prop 4 Netherite armor with Resistance 2, and the Terraria's gear will be full Solar Flare armor with Terra Spark boots, Celestial Starboard, and Soaring Insignia for mobility, then the Celestial Shell, Fire Gauntlet, Warrior Emblem, and Avenger Emblem for damage. Now for Terrarian's defense, the Celestial Shell gives 7 defense, while the Solar Flare gives 78, giving 85 defense. Plus the Solar Flare gives another 12% damage reduction. In Terraria, the way that defense works is you literally subtract the defense you have from the damage. So if you have 100 defense and take 200 damage, you would only take 100 of that damage. And for the percentage damage reduction in Terraria, you take the damage reduction percent and then defense is applied. So this means of the 255 damage that Steve could hit the Terrarian with, the Terrarian would only take 146 damage of it. So it would take about 3 seconds to kill the Terrarian. Adding in the Iron Skin Potion and Endurance Potion gives 10% damage reduction and 8 defense, making this 145 damage, 105. Now it takes 3.6 seconds to take down the Terrarian in a pure damage battle. This doesn't factor in healing potions though, since the Terrarian can heal 200 health instantly every minute. So that really means the Terrarian has 800 health, taking the time up to 4.8 seconds. Now for the Terrarian's damage. The damage buffs we have from the Celestial Cell is 15% damage at night, the Fire Gauntlet's 12%, Warrior Emblem's 15%, and the Avenger Emblem is 12%. And then another 29% from the Solar Flare armor. I won't go into melee speed here since it doesn't affect the Zenith that much, and adding all this up gives a total of 83.1% extra damage. And adding this to the old damage gives 1468 damage per second, and after Steve's armor gives about 292 damage per second, meaning it would take about a second to kill Steve. So the Terrarian would take less than a second to kill Steve, while Steve would take 4.8 seconds at best to take down the Terrarian. So in a straight DPS race, the Terrarian would win. And now for the third part, strategies. The biggest reason that most people say Steve would win is of course the mace, but the biggest problem with that is the Terrarian has the Celestial Starboard and the Rod of Harmony. So the Terrarian can go 84 miles an hour in the air going straight horizontal, and can teleport anywhere on screen instantly, making it nearly impossible to hit him. And even if the Terrarian wasn't moving, when Steve's coming down, the Terrarian can just go and absolutely shred Steve up before he can even hit him. Even without wings, from what I can find, Steve goes about 18 miles an hour with a Speed 2 potion, while the Terrarian setup without asphalt lets you go 34 miles an hour on the ground, so the Terrarian can easily outrun Steve. And another advantage that's really big for the Terrarian is durability. If this fight ended up just being whoever ran out of resources first, the Terrarian would win by a mile. Since the Terrarian has no durability, doesn't have to eat, so they can really just run around in circles, while Steve has to use a lot of potions, has to eat, his durability run out, so eventually, if it just came down to pure resources, the Terrarian would win. Adding on to this, the Terrarian can carry 10,000 of any item, almost, in a stack. Plus has a couple different options for storage, so that's another good advantage for the Terrarian. And one of the best strategies that I think the Terrarian has is hiding. He can box himself up in something like obsidian, and the Terrarian's attacks can go through blocks, so he can teleport out whenever he wants with the Rod of Harmony and never get hit by Steve. Of course, another good thing for Steve is end crystals, which do 400 damage after converting. So if the Terrarian got hit, this would take a massive chunk of his health down, but once again, the Terrarian can just teleport away. Another strategy for the Terrarian is, since the Celestial Starboard can hover, he could just float above Steve. But this could be combated by Steve by moving out of the Zenith's range or using his Elytra, making this strategy not as useful. Another massive one that I found after scrolling for the wiki and tested out with my friend, his channel will be linked in the description, is that you can't take damage while recalling. Every time you recall, you get 1 second of iframes, so you could just constantly recall with stacks of 10,000, or just use a magic mirror and basically never get hit. This does work at PvP, but I tested it and it sadly doesn't work against bosses. And now for the mace part. I got my second account, which is on Bedrock Edition, but the mace's damage on Bedrock is nearly identical as Java, and after getting around the same amount of health as the Terrarian would have, and about the same armor with a lever chestplate, I tested out falling from a few different heights, including the ones on screen, and I was able to one-hit the Terrarian after falling from 11 blocks up. This isn't very high, but this is in Minecraft blocks, which are about 1 meter each, about 3.3 feet, and Terrarias are 2 feet tall. This means those 11 blocks are 36 feet, so about 18 blocks tall in Minecraft. The mace also had density on it, rather than Breach, since Terraria doesn't have a ton of damage reduction, so it doesn't do as much damage. This means Steve could pretty easily one-hit the Terrarian, since it isn't that high up, but with wind charges, they only go up 6 blocks, so he couldn't one-hit them with it. Like I said earlier, there are 5 big strategies that the Terrarian can use to dodge the mace. First is to just walk away with his high speeds. Second is to fly away with those high speeds. Third is to teleport with the Rod of Harmony. Fourth is to just place blocks above his head. And fifth, which is my favorite, I demonstrated earlier. Since the Terrarian can kill Steve in less than a second, he could just go and shred the Terrarian. These strategies make it very hard, if not impossible, for Steve to hit the Terrarian. And on the last one, even if Steve has totems of undying, the Terrarian would still kill him in about 2 seconds with both of them. And with the Zenith's insanely far range, about 120 feet, he would have plenty of time to kill Steve while Steve's heading down. In conclusion, this challenge isn't fair. Terraria is a game focused all around combat, with over 30 unique bosses and event bosses, while Minecraft only has 2 official bosses, both of which have very low health when converting to Terraria's health. And that's because Minecraft's a game more focused around adventure, building your own world, as it's a 3D infinite world, pretty much, sandbox game where you can do nearly anything you can imagine. And with the modding scene, you pretty much can do anything. While Terraria has a very clear progression, and you cannot get items without defeating certain bosses. But really, there are only a few items locked behind bosses in Minecraft, with you being able to get to the end islands without fighting the Ender Dragon, and the Wither only unlocking the beacon. And this makes it so this challenge isn't fair. It's a fun challenge to think up, but these games aren't really made to compare. But as you learn in this video, you learn the exact times it would take for each of them to take down the other one, and some of the best strategies. And if you have any other ideas or strategies or anything else, comment down below. This took me weeks to research for, script, record, and edit, so if you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing as it helps me out a ton. And if you have a friend that you think would like it, share this with them. I've linked a couple other videos that I use to cite in this video, like the ones I mentioned saying that the Terrarian isn't 3D, and those are all linked in the description below. I also linked my two biggest sources for this video, the Terraria and Minecraft Wiki, where you can find nearly all of the information in this video just by searching it up. Now, if you want some more videos, the link on the bottom right are Terraria 2 Truths and a Lie. The bottom left are maxing stats out in Terraria, like damage. The top left is what YouTube thinks you want to watch next. The top right's a subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more.